Last time, we told you that Victoria Island wasn't always Victoria Island, that it belonged to one family, the Onairu chieftaincy, before colonial Lagos decided who really got to live there. We also told you something happened to the people standing in the way. We just didn't tell you what. In 1948, Lagos Executive Development Board moved to formally take the land. They paid the Oniru family some £250,000 in compensation for the territory itself, and a further £150,000 for the homes, the people, and the shrines that would be destroyed in the process. On paper, that looks like a transaction, a fair price, even for the era. But here's what the paperwork doesn't capture. An entire population of tenants, fishermen, and worshippers who had no real say in the deal and nowhere to go but wherever the government decided to put them. And that place was a stretch of swampy lagoon front land that the displaced were resettled into. Lagosians would come to know it by a single word: Morocco. Although Morocco didn't stay small, over the following decades, it grew into a sprawling waterfront community, home to Ijaw and Ilaje fishermen, migrants from Ghana and Togo, and wave after wave of Lagosians displaced from other parts of the city by other government projects. By 1990, Morocco was home to an estimated 300,000 people spread across roughly 30 distinct neighborhoods. From its edges, residents could look directly across the water and see the lights of the now Victoria Island, formerly Igbere and Ikoyi, glittering just a few hundred meters away. Two completely different Lagos cities separated by a creek. Officially, the government called it an eyesore, below sea level and a flood-prone region. It did not stop there. The government attempted to still clear that settlement. The first attempt to clear Morocco came in 1980 under civilian governor Latif Jakande. It triggered riots so severe that some government workers sent to enforce it were killed. Therefore, the eviction was abandoned at that time. At around 9 in the morning of July 14th, 1990, every entrance into Morocco was sealed off by armed soldiers and mobile police. The order had come from the state's military administrator, Colonel Raji Rasaki. What followed was disastrous, and it has been described by survivors and human rights observers as the largest forced eviction in Nigerian history. Bulldozers moved through the community for close to 2 weeks, leveling homes, in many cases, with people's belongings, and by multiple survivor accounts, people themselves still inside their houses. Survivors who later spoke publicly described being beaten by the security forces sent to clear them out. Some women reported being assaulted during the operation. Families, fleeing with whatever they could carry, tried to cross the Five Cowrie Creek by canoe, and some did not survive the crossing. At least one documented account describes a mother and her children drowning while trying to ferry salvage belongings to safety. The government's official justification was that Morocco sat below sea level. It flooded constantly, and it needed to be filled with sand for everyone's safety. Of the roughly 10,000 homeowners who lost property and lives in Morocco, the Lagos state government promised resettlement to about 3,000 of them, relocating them to unfinished housing estates at Ilasan, Ikota, and Epei. And of those promised allocations, around 1,000 turned out to be for buildings that hadn't even been completed yet. In reality, only an estimated 2,000 of those 10,000 homeowners ever received any form of replacement shelter. The remaining roughly 8,000 were left to fend for themselves, many scattering into Lagos and neighboring Ogun State with nothing. Notwithstanding, survivors pursued compensation through Nigerian courts for more than 2 decades. Most never saw meaningful resolution. As recently as the 30th anniversary of the demolition, evictees were still gathering. Some of them now facing the threat of being displaced again from the very resettlement estates they'd been pushed into in 1990. And Morocco was never an isolated incident. Researchers tracking eviction patterns in Lagos have documented at least 91 separate eviction exercises between 1973 and 2024, affecting more than 2 million people directly. The pattern that flattened Morocco in 1990 has continued into the present. Waterfront communities cleared in 2024 and 2025 to make way for luxury housing, with thousands displaced as recently as the last 2 years. This didn't start with Rasaki's bulldozers either. Lagos's colonial administration was doing version 1 of this as far back as the 1850s, clearing African residents to create segregated, whites-only European reservation zones in a city where, by 1872, fewer than 100 of its more than 60,000 residents were of European origin. The mechanism changes. Soldiers instead of colonial police, real estate developers instead of the crown. The underlying move, clear the people, keep the land, has run through Lagos for over 170 years. Anyways, the next time you see Victoria Island in a music video, a celebrity's Instagram story, or a billion-naira real estate listing, remember what's actually underneath it. A name that was erased. A family that lost most of what it once governed. A village of 300,000 people who were given 2 weeks' notice by bulldozer, and a debt that was never actually paid. Victoria Island isn't built on sand reclaimed from the sea. Not really, not necessarily. It's actually built on silence reclaimed from the people who used to live there. If this is the kind of history you wish they taught you in school, that's exactly what this channel exists for. Subscribe, because there are more cities, more islands, and more silences just like this one. And we're going to keep digging.